Have you ever felt completely alone? Not just in a room, but in the world? Imagine being so alone that animals don't even run away from you because they hardly notice you and because they have never known the fear of man. Your only companions are wind, memory, and the ache of lost voices. What happens to the mind, the heart, the memory in that kind of solitude? In this quiet, the heart speaks louder than ever. And in this quiet, we have William Cowper's The Solitude of Alexander Selkirk. William Cowper was born in 1731 and he passed away in 1800. He was an English poet and a hymnodist. Though he lived in the height of neoclassicism, his tone broke away from the rigid intellectual one that marked his contemporaries. His poetry is known for its emotional sensitivity, personal reflection, and deep concern with nature and religion. And that is why he is also referred to as one of the precursors of Romanticism, people who brought in Romanticism to England. The central character of the poem is Alexander Selkirk, who was a real figure in history. He was a Scottish sailor who was marooned on an uninhabited island in the South Pacific in the early 1700s. He spent 4 years in isolation on that island before he was finally rescued. His story fascinated people, and it was also the inspiration of Daniel Defoe's famous novel Robinson Crusoe. But unlike Defoe's version, which celebrates self reliance and survival, Cowper's poem speaks about the cost of isolation. The poem is a dramatic monologue, and while we read the poem today, we will pay attention to how he uses certain neoclassical elements but subverts them so that it becomes a blend of neoclassical and romantic elements. And this blend is what makes this poem part of transition poetry. Transition is you go from one age to the next. And while transition, what happens, elements of both ages are found in that particular piece of work. Cowper moves between these two periods, neoclassicism and romanticism. Neoclassicism valued order, restraint, focus on human society. Romanticism was about imagination, nature, the idea of noble savage. What we see in Cowper is a retention of 18th century poetic structure and incorporation of romantic elements in it. Let's now turn to the poem itself. The title of the poem should grab your attention. It's called The Solitude of Alexander Selkirk. So, the subject of the poem is Alexander Selkirk, but more than that, the subject of the poem is solitude. And the idea of making an abstract thing the topic of a poem is a very romantic idea. The main content of the poem is not the character of Selkirk, but how he is feeling, his loneliness, his isolation. So we shift from concrete subjects in poetry towards abstract subjects in poetry, and in this case, the primary subject of the poem is solitude. I am monarch of all I survey, my right there is none to dispute. Now, since Alexander Selkirk, he is on this island all alone, therefore, there is no other human being to contest with him so as to who is the owner of the land there. But interestingly, if you are the only one on an island, does it really matter who owns property rights? It is as if he is establishing a kind of neoclassical order, like man placed above animals. And at the same time, there is a parodic echo of the colonial rhetoric, like he is owning the place. But what does owning an island mean? It should mean you have power over everything, like we see in case of Prospero in Shakespeare's The Tempest. But does he have same kind of power? From the center all round to the sea, I am lord of the fowl and the brute. This also echoes the biblical statement that man is the lord of animals. So, this begins as a formal declaration of what the new classical people believed in. And then there is a shift in tone. Oh, solitude. So, this is a direct address to an abstract idea. Solitude means loneliness. And this kind of address, which is also called an apostrophe, like you're addressing somebody or something which is not present there, which is an abstract concept. So, this is example of an apostrophe. And usually, apostrophe is a very popular device with romantic poets. Because apostrophe means what? You're imagining that there is listener, a listener who is either somebody who is completely absent or a concept which is not human. So it actually cannot hear you, like death, happiness, fortune, fate, solitude. So this becomes a marker of that blending of romantic elements. That this is where romanticism steps in when he is addressing solitude as if solitude can hear him. And what does he ask solitude? Where are the charms that sages have seen in thy face? So, this is kind of a direct challenge to this idealized, classical, and stoic notions of solitude that in solitude you meditate, you reach divinity. He is asking solitude that where are your charms that I have always heard about? Now that I have you with me, I have no happiness in life. And then he makes this very bold statement: better dwell in the midst of alarms than reign in this horrible place. And this is again, interestingly, a very subtle echo of Satan's words in Paradise Lost. Satan had said that he would rather be the ruler of hell than serve in heaven, right? So, this idea that being a ruler is a great thing is directly challenged here. He says, I don't want to be ruler of a place if I have to deal with so much of solitude. I would rather stay amidst chaos, amidst war, amidst insecurities, than stay here in this horrible place. So, the first two lines of this stanza, which is in the form of both an apostrophe and a rhetorical question, that there is no charm actually in solitude, we have the next two lines structured like an antithesis. Dwelling in the midst of alarm means living in city, living amidst human beings, and reign in this horrible place is the opposite idea, that I am here in this lonely place, and these two opposing ideas, they form the thesis and antithesis. So this figure of speech is antithesis. Okay, these two lines. And then he continues to say how possession without companionship is a hollow thing. And this is very ironical because you're saying that I would rather prefer a world of chaos than this world of silence, where actually people say that peace is better than war. We move on to further understanding him. I am out of humanity's reach. I must finish my journey alone. Never hear the sweet music of speech. I start at the sound of my own. I am out of humanity's reach. Now, when he is using the expression humanity, he actually doesn't mean the quality of humans. He means human beings. So, when he is using abstract for the concrete, it is called a synecdoche. He is saying that he is away from the reach of human beings. But if you think in this way, that what is humanity? Humanity is basically the quality of human beings which they discover in each other. So unless there is another human being, you cannot understand if you are human even. So his crisis on this island is that he feels he is dehumanized because he is living with the animals and is away from human beings. He has lost touch with humanity itself. But is it a bad thing? Because romantics would say that's a wonderful thing, that you are living amidst nature, away from human society. This is kind of paradise. But then you have to remember that Cowper, the writer of this poem, is also a neoclassicist for whom human beings, human society has its merits. When he says, I must finish my journey alone, he's obviously not referring to any literal journey. He means his life. So he's using metaphor here, and he constantly uses alliteration, sweet music of speech, start at the sound of my own, repetition of that S sound. Start means to get surprised because it is only human beings who have the ability to speak, to use language. On this island, he is so lonely that if he speaks out loud or he makes any human sound with his mouth, he gets shocked because that sound appears to be alien to him. So imagine your own voice becoming something which you don't recognize anymore. And what about the animals? The beasts that roam over the plain my form with indifference see. Now, this rearranging or rather playing with word order is a very favorite device of poets. In simple English, it would read like this, that the beasts that roam over the plain see my form with indifference. That means the animals are looking at him, that is his form, his structure, his body, but they neither show any fear nor show any interest. So they are not interested in him. So he doesn't feel special among them. Now, that brings us to the first line of the poem. Is he really the monarch of the place? Because nobody considers him as the ruler of the place. He is not even given any recognition by anyone. So, unless you are recognized as the king by your subjects, are you really a king? Or is it just you're consoling yourself? They are so unacquainted with man, their tameness is shocking to me. And this is also paradoxical because if an animal is tame towards you, it means it is not attacking you. Why do animals attack? Because they have this instinctive knowledge that human beings are not to be trusted, because human beings are capable of causing hurt. But on this island, it's like a pre fallen state of Eden. The animals are not aware that Selkirk is capable of harming them. So they are also not attacking him. And their indifference is actually seen as tameness. They are not actually tame. Tame is when you are almost domesticated under the rule of a human. That is being tame. These animals are not tame in that sense. They are tame because they are not attacking him, but he is feeling shocked because he has knowledge about human animal interaction, and he knows that in the wilderness, in the wild places, animals attack humans, so their tameness is not his expected reaction, and so he is feeling shocked. Society, friendship, and love divinely bestowed upon man. It goes back to the neoclassical values, the abstract triad: society, friendship, love. These are the things that make human life an integral part of a social existence. So they represent the values of civilization and in line with neoclassical ideals. Oh, had I the wings of a dove, how soon would I taste you again? So he wants to go back to the human world, but he knows that he cannot fly back and he is stuck on this island, and he wants to have the wings of a dove. Why particularly is using the word dove here? Again, because of its link with the biblical image of wings of the dove. You can find them in Psalm 55 6. And he associates emotional desire with some kind of a spiritual yearning. So there's a blend of religious and uh, social yearning in him. What would he have done if he could fly to his homeland, to his friends, to the one he loves? My sorrows I then might assuage. I could reduce my sorrows. I would be able to heal myself in the ways of religion and truth. Now, you might ask that what is stopping him from being religious on this island? That is a very interesting question. Had he been a complete romantic, he would have been like Wordsworth, a pantheist, a nature lover, and he would have found divinity or a way to practice religion on that island. But being essentially a neoclassicist, religion for him is rooted in the religious rituals that are observed in the church with other human beings. So, religion here is directly connected to institutionalized religion, the religion of church, which is rooted in rituals, not the way William Blake looked at religion. Okay. Might learn from the wisdom of age and be cheered by the sallies of youth. He just wants a normal life where he would interact with older people, senior ones, and learn from them, and he would get joy and fun when he would interact with the young people. So, on one hand, we do have a neoclassical ethical tone, but we also have this personal longing, and emphasis on personal longing is a very romantic thing. All right. And then he is angry at the winds. So he says, "Ye winds that have made me your sport, you have played with my life. Convey to this desolate shore some cordial, endearing report of a land I shall visit no more." So he's asking the same winds which have brought him here to also bring to him some news from his homeland. He knows that he will not be able to reach his homeland, but he requests the same wind that, "Please, you have brought me here, bring me some news also." My friends, do they now and then send a wish or a thought after me? So he is upset with the wind, but at the same time, the way he is addressing the wind, it is as if he is imagining the wind to be someone who can understand him, listen to him. Not very different from Shelley speaking to the west wind. In the west wind, Shelley wanted the wind to lift him up, to make him its sport. But here we see that he is angry because the wind has played with him. So, what is it? Is he romantic? Yes, because he imagines the wind as a sentient being, as somebody who is capable of listening to him, understanding him. At the same time, neoclassical because he doesn't like the wind at all. He wants to be with human beings. Oh, tell me, I yet have a friend. And he also knows the limitations. If he's absent from his companions, there might be a time when they would not remember him even. Though a friend I am never to see. So this direct emotional questioning, it shows a shift from his rational way of speaking to a very confessional mode of delivery. And at the same time, he is acknowledging the power of imagination. And this is something where he is very, very romantic in his tone. How fleet is a glance of the mind. How quick is the speed of mind. Compared with the speed of its flight, the tempest itself lags behind. The tempest, a sea storm. And this idea of a sea storm keeps on coming in his words because he's always thinking about the time when he came to this island. And he says that the tempest might have a great speed. The speed of imagination, the speed of mind is faster. And this is something that we already know if we have read the Mahabharata, where Yudhishthira was asked what has the greatest speed, and he says the mind. So when he is thinking about his native land, he reaches there through imagination. So his mind has a great speed. But the problem is it also comes back very, very soon. So the speed of mind is compared to the tempest, and then arrows of light. What is the speed of light? We all know that light travels at a great speed. So he's comparing the speed of mind or imagination to the tempest and the light. And although he is not using as or like, this is definitely an instance of simile. When I think of my own native land, in a moment I seem to be there, but alas, recollection at hand, when I realize that I am there and I have actually reached there through my memories, recollections. The same moment I come back soon hurries me back to despair. So his recollection, his memories, which take him there, bring him back as fast. And here, recollection is kind of personified because it is chasing him back. So, this stanza shows us that he is in an emotional unrest filled with anxiety. So, how does he resolve it? He resolves it through the same thing that creates his anxiety, through nature. And this is where the romantic element floods the scene. He needs imagination, he needs nature to re establish order. Although order is something that neoclassical people had great faith in. So you see how this blend is beautifully brought in the poem. But the sea fowl is gone to her nest, the sea bird. It's evening time. The beast is laid down in his lair. Everybody has gone back to their nests, their caves, their homes. What about our speaker? Where is his home? This is his home. Even here is a season of rest. We were talking about unrest, but this island, which has filled his heart with unrest, is also the same island which will provide him with rest. Because it is the cycle of life, it is the rule of nature. Even here is a season of rest, and I to my cabin repair. I repair to my cabin, and the word repair has double connotations here. One is he is retiring for the night, he's going to sleep, and repair also means he's healing out of some wound. So, all through the day, he looks at his life and he feels despair, and his heart is wounded. But then at the end of the day, he goes back to the place which he has built for himself, his cabin, and he sleeps. And that kind of heals him in a way. So, nature has a very peculiar way of healing you even when it hurts you. There is mercy in every place, and mercy, encouraging thought, gives even affliction a grace. Affliction is suffering, some kind of setback. So, mercy is something which can provide us with a sense of divine grace, divine forgiveness, even when we are suffering for something or suffering under something. Gives even affliction a grace and reconciles man to his lot. Lot here means his destiny, his fate. It is connected to the word lottery. That is, when we come to this world, we engage in a game of lottery, lots, and we don't have control. But we can act according to what is required of us. So he says that reconcile, that okay, I'm all right. Whatever has happened, I'm okay with it. This acceptance of your destiny. This has Christian overtones, having faith in God, having faith in mercy. So this is very neoclassical. But this reconcilement is obtained through nature, which is very romantic. So if you look at the major figures of speech in the poem, you would see that he's using apostrophe, like when he's addressing solitude as, oh, solitude, and then events that have made me your sport. That is also kind of an indirect address to an abstract idea or non human thing. Then you have personification, where you have human qualities attributed to non human things. And we have seen him attributing human qualities to things like wind, solitude, recollections. Okay, so a lot of abstract ideas are imagined as persons or humans, and which is a romantic trait. We also have a lot of metaphors used. The wings of a dove, he wants to fly like a dove, and then glance of the mind. And then when he is comparing the sound of speech to music. So there are a lot of metaphors we find in the poem. We also see the use of simile where he's comparing, like how fleet is a glance of the mind compared to the speed of its flight. So all this uh, use gives us the idea this is constantly comparing two ideas. And then, of course, there is a lot of alteration, I'll just point out some of them. Sages have seen in thy face, so alteration of S. Then again, you have gives even affliction a grace, alteration of G. The other figures of speech might include paradox. The tempest is shocking to me. Hyperbole is also there. The tempest itself lags behind. So, tempest or the storm is supposed to have a great speed, and that is considered to have less speed than the speed of mind. Although you might say that it is natural because imagination is indeed something which is faster than the tempest, but you might call it a hyperbole to some extent. And of course, the expression "I'm the monarch of all I survey." This is definitely a kind of hyperbole. We have innumerable number of symbols here, like the word cabin. It is a symbol of isolation, and at the same time, it's a symbol of security and shelter. Then dove, again symbol of peace, freedom, and at the same time, a religious symbol. He plays with the use of synecdoche a lot of times, especially when he's using abstract ideas to actually mean concrete things like humanity is reach. Then when he says, I might learn from the wisdom of age, he's not saying that age will come and teach him something, but aged men. Again, sallies of youth. So, sallies of youth means actually youthful men. So, he will be cheered by youthful friends. So, here you have the use of abstract ideas in place of concrete objects or human beings. And this is the use of synecdoche. At times, he uses rhetorical interrogation like questions which have answer hidden inside them. That where are the charms that sages have seen in your face? Do my friends talk about me? Do they send me a wish? So, these kinds of questioning, this adds a personal touch to the poem and it makes it more romantic than neoclassical. But you have to remember that this is a dramatic monologue. And romantic poets usually do not write dramatic monologues because dramatic monologue means there is a gap between the speaker and the poet. This is the life of the speaker, not the poet. When you read Wordsworth's poems, Shelley's poems, usually you find Shelley speaking directly, Wordsworth speaking directly. But here you have William Cowper not speaking directly to us, but Selkirk speaking to us. So this gap creates a certain kind of objectivity, which was developed in such a beautiful way by Robert Browning during Victorian times. This is something which is making this poem more neoclassical than romantic, at least so far as the poetic persona, speaking persona is concerned. So, at the end of the day, it is, of course, a blend of the two. It is not predominantly romantic, neither it is predominantly neoclassical. There is a very beautiful blend of the two elements, which shows that Cowper was very sincere, very honest with the changes that were coming up, and he was also very instrumental in bringing about those changes. Because it is only after we have Cowper and Goldsmith that we finally have William Blake, the madman. And then we have the Romantic Age. So, if you have this poem in your college level, then you might prepare answer to the question whether it is a neoclassical poem or a romantic poem, which we have discussed at length today. You might be asked to simply give a critical appreciation of the poem. In that case, you have to mention the various figures of speech, the blend of neoclassical and romantic elements, the meter of the poem, and you might also mention why is there such predominance of anapaestic meter in the poem. The meter of the poem is anapaestic trimeter with some of the feet being iambic. It goes like this. There are two unaccented or unstressed syllables, and then there is a stressed syllable. I am monarch of all I survey. So it's like that, all right? Uh, that means he is deliberately choosing a meter where, in case of iambic, there is a certain kind of a speed, like one unstress, one stress, one unstress, one stress. But when it comes to anapaestic, you're adding an unstressed syllable. So it gives you a sense of non action, poise, as if you're waiting, as if you have all the time in the world. And that is so compatible with the subject matter of the poem, because that is the problem here. He's all alone and time is slow here and he has no rush. So anapistic works best for him. All right. So you mentioned all these things in critical appreciation. You might also be asked about the dominant images and symbolism in the poem, although that is a question which is rarely asked in case of Cowper. But you already know about them if you have paid attention in this class. So I hope this poem is clear to you all. I think it's also part of alternative English syllabus of class 11 or 12 under CBSE or ISA. I forgot which one. Do let me know in the comments if you have this poem in your school syllabus or college syllabus, and also let me know if this class has been useful to you. So till I see you all again in some class very soon, this is Monami Mukherjee signing off. Stay subscribed, stay happy. Bye bye.